All right, we're back. We just finished talking about a very small program that allows us our hello world to switch around the screen. And you might say, well, okay, Tom, show us something else, right? I will. But the thing for you to understand when we do this, right? And if I was to, to do this, this hello world is what it's doing is it keeps on tracking, and I'm using a lot of code for this, right? Now this is also based on my machine, right? So it's trying to do 60 frames per second every frame, right? And it could be different for your machine. If I was to put this up on Azure, as an example, for some people it works just like this. Other people will be like really slow because maybe your machine is slow, right? So let's take a look at this thing and see how I can improve it. So I've got all this duplicate code, right? And you know what? It begs for me. It's begging me to do something better than this, right? So let's write the method first as a function, and then we'll incorporate it into our label class. So first, I know what I want to do. I want to check the bounds. That's what I want to call it. And I want to check bounds based on a x and y coordinate. So I want to call this function check bounds. Right? I'm going to check both bounds though, right? So it's going to return void. But one thing it's going to have is a parameter, right? And my parameter is either going to be the y or the x coordinate. Y or the x coordinate. So I'm going to pass the y or the x, and depending on which y or the x I'm passing in, right? If I'm passing in the y or the x, it's got to somehow know, right, that it's the y coordinate of the hello label, right? So check bounds. So I want to only pass in one, either the y coordinate or the x coordinate, and I want to tell it which one it is. How do I do that, right? So if I pass in the y, then I want to say my string is going to say something like it's the y coordinate, right? Or here's the other thing. I want to pass it by reference somehow. I want to pass it by reference, right? So depending on what the object is, doesn't matter what the object is, if I pass it by reference, right, it's this x and this y that I'm passing in, right? The y of the hello label, right? So maybe what I should pass in here is the whole label object. So if I try this, let's try this out, right? So my check bounds then would have a parameter that's of type objects.label. So I'll call this label, and it'll be of type objects.label. Right? That's the first parameter I'm passing in. So I pass the label object in. Good, good, good. Now I got to tell it which coordinate I'm using. Is it the x coordinate or the y coordinate that I'm changing? Right? I'm checking. So what am I checking? So I'm going to say, we'll call it coordinate, and it'll be a string. Right? So I'll check inside here if my string, my coordinate, right, is equal to a of the x, then it'll be label.x that I'm switching, right? So that's the first thing. I'm checking which one it is, right? So if it's that way, then I'm just composing this for you in a second. So I'm going to try and make a piece of generic code, right? If my coordinate is the x coordinate, as an example, then it's, my the one I'm switching is var. Maybe I'll make a local variable, and maybe coordinate is. I'll say coordinate type, just that way I'll use coordinate. Just give me a second here. Coordinate type is equal to x, right? Then I'll say var coordinate. Coordinate is equal to right now. I'll declare it as this, and I'll say my coordinate then is equal to the x, which is label.x, right? Label coming in here, label.x, right? Else, and we'll fix this too in a second. Else, my coordinate is equal to label.y. There's a way of fixing this to make it in one line. How do I do that? Remember, ternary operator. I think I've shown you this before. Maybe not. But it looks like this. Coordinate, this is the other way of doing it, is equal to, well, which one is it? Depending on what it is, so I'll say coordinate type. Depending what the coordinate type is, if it's equal to if it's equal to x, then no, label.x, otherwise label.y. Right? This is the ternary operator, and I can do all this in one line, like this. And if I do this in one line, then I can probably do something like this. And then I don't have to do this anymore. Little type function. So this basically says, what is it? Is it the x? Depending on what I put in there, y or x, I decide what this coordinate is. What coordinate am I hitting? Am I hitting the x or the? And maybe the word coordinate is wrong. Maybe what I use is axis. Which axis is it, the x or the y axis? And maybe I'll use coordinate there again. Hold on a second. I'm just changing back and forth because I'm trying to find a good name for it. Coordinate. Axis. Yeah. There we go. If coordinate is x, then label.x. You pass. So the way this works is the ternary operator. If you guys have seen this, I've done this in C# with you guys already. But this is the ternary operator. And if I look at ternary operator, up online, what that is, if I go ternary operator, no, it's a part of every C-style language, every language, C#, Java, JavaScript, whatever. Right? If I look at this, what this is, it looks like this. The what happens is you have the question mark, right? The feature of the ternary operator is you have the question mark, and if you have the question mark, anything that comes after the question mark is the true statement, and everything comes after the colon, right, is the false part, right? So what I'm really saying here is this. My access, right, check what this is, do a conditional statement. So depending on, I'll write this a little nicer for you guys. Depending on what the condition equals, if coordinate is equal to x, is either true or false. If it's true, then take this is the question mark, take this and assign it to the axis, right? Otherwise, colon, if it's false, right, take that and assign it to axis. So instead of doing an if-else with 9 lines, you can do it in 1 line. All right, so that's the first thing. So what's the axis? And now the second thing is, I want to do this stuff, right? So instead of lower bound and lower bound and upper bound, right? This is the step I want to do because it's the same. I want to copy this code for a second. So here's one bound. And here's the other bound. Right? This is not the bound. We're going to put hello x and y anymore. We want to use access. So access, right, is here. And axis, if I hover over it, is just a number, right? That's all it is, a number, right? So now I can say if my axis is greater than 320, then it's equal to 320. If it's less than 0, it's equal to 0. That's true for every axis. So that's part of it, right? And so that kills that one part. And the other part is this part here, this check, to see if my axis is the random number, right? So I can go up here. That's a different thing. I'm combining them two in the same thing. This could be a different method altogether, right? But let's just say I want to put it into 1. Instead of using hello label x and y, right? I'm going to put my axis in here, right? And this wouldn't be this, would just be the axis itself, right? dy, right, would be the change in y and the change in x. Now, depending on what it is, there's another thing I have to change. Is I have to change to check to see what my y or my x is. Depending on what it is, it's going to be my y direction. So this is where it doesn't, it almost makes it so that I don't want to use it here because I'm doing every method or class should have one thing it does, and I'm trying to make it do 2 things. Once I start going into 2 things, I'm writing a bad method. So let's just do 1 first. It makes me cringe when I do that, right? I'm sort of trying to combine into 1. It's not the answer. So let's just get rid of this thing because I don't want this. Okay, fine. Now I have my check bounds. I can check to see if it's bounds, and I can set that up. So I have the one piece. Watch for a second. Now I want to set it back. So depending on what I have here, label X or label Y, right? That's what I want. I want this number to be equal to label X or label Y, depending on what it is. And I have my coordinates still, right? So I gotta figure out how to put it back, right? How do I put it back? Well, I can return it. So I could do something like this: return. And instead of it returning void, it can return number. I want to return my axis back out. Okay, so that means that check bounds now returns a number, returns something. All right. Okay. How does it check this stuff and this stuff, right? My X and Y, right? So I check, and if something happens, right? What if none of these conditions are true? That's the other possibility, right? If none of these conditions are true, then whatever my axis number is, right, is going to pass through. So it's not going to change anything, right? Because look, I'm going to get my axis, my number from my axis, according to my X and Y, whichever one it is, right? So depending, it doesn't matter which one it is, X and Y, right? If it doesn't meet these conditions, it's going to skip these two conditions, and it's just going to return out whatever number I got in, X or Y, right? That's what I'm doing here. First I'm saying I'm going to set the boundary to 0. I'm going to set the boundary here. I'm going to check bounds, and if it's true, I'm going to set it to 0. Okay. So that means I just get rid of all this. Right? I just got rid of all this. Right? And now what I want to do is I want to see check bounds. I want to check bounds for both my X and Y. Right? So I'll say hello label dot X, right, is equal to check bounds, right? And it'll be the hello label, right? Oh wait, I never used the label, did I? Right, label X and label Y, right? Actually, what I really need to do is pass in a number here that is, you know, my X and Y coordinate, whatever the coordinate is, right? Well, if I do that, right, then I don't even need to do this statement at all, right? All I have to pass in here is hello X and hello Y, right? Whatever it is, right? So axis is really what I want to care about. This axis should be here instead, right? So axis would be a number. See how I'm formulating this for yourself? Axis is actually a number, this one. And whatever that number is, we don't have to do this check anymore. We can cut that out. And we're going to put this hello X, hello label X inside here, right? And that should satisfy our requirements. Well, let's see why are we getting an error? It says supply parameters did not match. I need a coordinate string, X or Y, right? That I need to tell it. Is it X or is it Y? But really, do I need that anymore, right? Because I'm not checking if it's X or Y. I don't need this anymore either. That, X. And now what I'm doing is, right, I can do the same thing for Y. Hello.Y is equal to check bounds hello label.y. I'm doing that because I'm checking the bounds. Depending on what it is, you're going to get the X and Y coordinate different. That's the first thing I'm doing. So that took care of all that by this little method. Okay? Now, this is a totally different creature, right? And I got to think to myself, how do I make this more generic? This thing here. It's more difficult to do because I'm passing in both Y coordinates, so the axis, right? I'm passing this piece in, and I'm also passing in the dy and the dx and the y and the direction. There's too many changes. So it almost begs to differ that I kind of probably leave it the way it is, right? I can make a method, but unless I had more cases, like 3, 4, 5, 6 more cases, then it makes sense to pass in all those parameters. Here, for 2, it doesn't make any sense. You're not going to save anything, in other words. Because you're going to do the same thing. I'm going to have this part here, and then I'm going to have almost the other part down here, which makes no sense, right? Huh? To see if this works? Yeah, see. There it is. But all those lines are gone, right? I only have I cut it down into, half of what I had.
It still does the same thing.
Yeah. It's called refactoring, right? So I've refactored it to look like this, and then I check my bounds, and depending on what it is, I reset this stuff here. So this does checking bounds. I'll say check bounds for x and y. Right? And this part, if you want to know what this is change direction and speed. Change direction and speed for x and y. Right? That's what this does. Okay, so if I want to include this thing here to save even more space, if I want to include this part in every one of my labels, right? By the way, these are hard-bound numbers, so we have to be careful because these hard-bound numbers only work with my screen parameters, right? My parameters are, my label is 320 by 320. My stage, right? What if it was bigger, right? Then I want to get how do I get the width of my object? Well, it's part of my canvas. My canvas has two attributes, right? My canvas x and my canvas y, right? My canvas width and my canvas height, right? I set those things already, right? So if you want it more generic, right? Depending, so you can have more than one. So this code here would work for any canvas, right? Okay. Then if that's true, let's see if we can do this together, right? I have to be able to read the canvas size, right? So can I do that? Can I get attribute of my width and my height? And where would I set that stuff, right? Where would I set that stuff? I probably would set it up here, right? So if I say something like canvas width, right, is a number, and var canvas height is also a number, right? I don't have it yet, but I will have it. Let's just, format the changes so you can see it's nice. Good, good, good. So I can do it here, right? I can say something like canvas dot get attribute, right? And I want to look at the name of the attribute, for example, my width, right? The width, and if that's true, I want to say that canvas width is equal to canvas get attribute width. But what am I getting back? I'm getting a string, and I want to make it a number. Now this is where I do parse, right? How do I make it a number? Parse int, right? It's going to be I'm parsing the canvas element, right? Whatever it is. So I'm getting a string, and I want to make it into a number. Hold on. Huh? No. Canvas width is a number, but canvas get attribute width is not giving me a number. It's giving me a string. Right? So canvas height is equal to parse int. Right? Parse int canvas get attribute, and then we'll say height. Okay? I got those. What I should probably do is test them, right? Because I want to see what those are, just to make sure I get the right number before I assign it, right? So I'll say console log. We'll say canvas width, right, plus canvas width, and console log canvas height is equal to canvas height. There we go. Let's see what I get when I run that now. So now I'm not changing anything. I'm just reading the canvas width and height, right? So if I do an inspect, and if I go down to my console, I should see 320 by 320. That's good. Now I've got numbers. That means that if I read the canvas height, and I know I'm setting them inside of I'm setting the canvas width and height, right? So I can read the canvas width and height. But that means I can set the canvas width and height. Hear me what I'm saying. I can set the canvas width and height, right? I can set it programmatically, right? How do I set the program with the canvas width and height? First of all, in my index.html right now, I'm setting it here as width and height attributes, right? But instead of hard coding it, I can make it programmatic. So let's get rid of this. Yeah. because in your case, your label won't be 320 by 320. It'll be whatever I told you to make. There's only a few options I had in your assignment, so it'll be something else, right? So how do I adjust for that? Or any label size, right? Any canvas size. So if I go back down to my app.ts, instead of getting the width and height, right? I want to set the width and height, right? And I can do that by getting rid of all this and getting rid of this too, right? To save us effort, canvas.set attribute. Then it's a key value pair, right? My attribute width and my value 320, and my canvas set attribute height. And then I can hard code it in 320, but this doesn't really take care of our issue because I have to be able to read them again, right? That's kind of sucky, right? So I could decide, like I had before, numbers, like default numbers for canvas width as a number. I can make this equal to, by default, 320, and var canvas height, right, as a number. I can default this to 320, right? And then in here, right, I can convert that to string. So canvas width toString, right? And I can do the same thing with my height. Canvas height toString, right? So once I've done that, that satisfies my requirements. But now I have the width and the height, so down here I can replace those two things. So I can say access. Oh, wait a minute. Which one am I looking at? I might have 320 by 480, right? So that will be totally different now for X and Y, right? So now I have to change my checkbounds method to say which one is it, height or width? And what am I checking here, right? My bound, my boundary, whatever it is. What's my number, right? Check bounds, I'm checking my axis, but what's my boundary, right? So I want to take in another optional, right? So boundary, which is a number. I'm going to pass in, just to make it really super intuitive, right? My hello label X plus my boundary, which is, in this particular case, my X boundary is, right, the width of my object, so canvas width. And this one, my Y, would be canvas height. It's going to work for both X and Y. This is making it much more useful now, this little thing, right? And instead of putting 320, I want to put in boundary. So it doesn't matter what it is, X or width or height, right? This is always going to would work, right? So now if I go back to my code to see what I get, I still get the same effect. Take a look. It works for both, right? Canvas width and height, right? All right, that's cool. Well, that means that I can replace this one too, right? Because my label X and label Y, here I've hard-coded it. That's not going to work for all situations. So therefore, let's change this as well. So Y would be canvas height, and X would be canvas width. Right? That's what I'm saying. These two are so different that it's like you'd have to replace everything, and it makes, you can make it for if I had another case, I could say that there might be a case for this, but these ones, there's a lot more, they're code saved. Okay. And all of this, right? All of this is I'm changing the position of my label, right? All of this stuff inside of my game loop, right? I'm changing the position of just my label, one label, right? Okay, why did I make canvas width and height? Because now, if I want to make my canvas a different size, I have my sizes right here by default. And actually, this shouldn't be, this is a new thing for ES6, ECMAScript 6, that's not available in JavaScript. It's called const. These things aren't going to change, right? Yeah. Constants. right? And neither is this one. The canvas is never going to change. I'm never going to modify the canvas. Well, let's do that. All right, so now by convention, canvas width and canvas height, because they're constants, should be named differently. So let's do that. So I'm going to refactor these ones, rename the symbol, and I'll say canvas width. It should be named now. And this should be canvas height because they're constants. That's just the convention. Canvas height. Because they're constants, you can see now canvas width and canvas height comes out in the code, right? You can see the canvas width and canvas height. These are constants that I'm using as opposed to numbers. So now let's make it a different size. Let's make my canvas a different size, like 640 by 480. Right? 640 by 480. Let's see what happens there. Does this work now? Well, yeah, it does, right? So now it doesn't just work for 320 by 320. It works for anything, any size, right? Very good. That's very good. I like your question, right? If I wanted this thing to fill up my browser, right, there's a couple ways I could do that, right? I could say that the size of the canvas, right, is equal to the size of my width. The width of my meaning. It's the size of my, the width of my browser, not my document, right? So it's the window.inner width and the window.inner height that I really want, right? Let's do that. So there I don't have to hard code anything. I don't have to even put a number in there anymore. If I want to, it's this, right? But I only do it once, right? Which means it won't be responsive. You're thinking of making it responsive, right? Inner width, and this is, well, it should be actually window.inner, just to make it clear. Window.inner width, and this is window.inner height. Now you can change these numbers anytime you want, but if I do this, right? Whoa, it's massive, like this, right? But it only does it once. And take a look. I also have this little space here that gives me, you know, if I look, I just resized my window. It didn't do anything, and I still have this space in here because I'm using Bootstrap, right? Bootstrap, right? Because I'm using Bootstrap in my code. If I really want it to be the whole size, right? Notice that I'm using a row container, right, for this one. So if I was to do this, I would have to change my HTML a little bit and take this out like this and put it here. Now let's see what it is. There it is. There's the window size, right? So it's my whole window. Okay, approximately. But the problem is, what if I resize my window? It doesn't show a different window. It doesn't show a different size. I want it to resize responsively. So when I resize my screen, from what you're saying, it resets the width and the height, right? Be careful. Be careful, because there's something that's doing things. So one of the ways to do that, of course, would be to have another event. And the event type, if you want to think about it, is a window event, right? I have an add event listener for load, but I also can have an add event listener for window.add event listener, and then the resize event. When the resize event hits, right, I want something to happen. I want to call resize. I don't have that function, right? I could make it something up here. I could do that. So here's my resize event. I could put it underneath my init for a second, right? Anytime the window change size, I could have a function called resize, right? That returns void. What I want to do is say something like this. Do this again. I want to do this part again. My canvas width, oh man, I made them consts. Let's just use vars for now, because if I make it const, I can't change it again, right? I'll copy these three things here, but I want to present them as consts, right? So I'll say that again. I'll say that changes size, right? So every time I resize the window, it's going to resize the width and the height of my canvas, right? Well, that's okay. That's okay, but the problem is that I also probably want to reset where this thing starts, my label, right? where I want to reset where my label starts off, my hello label, because my hello label's X and Y coordinates are, oh man, that's another thing, 160, 160, that can't be. That's going to be off. It can't be this. It's got to be half the height of the screen, right? Which means this has got to be canvas width times 0.5. And this has got to be canvas height times 0.5. I got to do that there as well. And that means I got to set my X and Y of my label again, because if I change the size of my screen, I better change it. So I just got to say something like hello label dot X is equal to canvas width times 0.5. So set it back in the middle whenever I reset, just to be safe. Because if it's on the corner, it's going to mess it up, right? And then canvas height and 0.5. Okay, let's try this out and see what happens. Whew. So on reset now, it'll reset this hello label in the middle. Let's see what happens. And now what happens is every time I reset my size, it'll keep the whole label at the middle, but also, depending on the size of my screen, it'll use my screen borders as the thing that makes my hello label flow in and out, or so I think. Well, it's a problem, right? Because I've reset my border, right? I've reset my border size, and I'm reading it differently. It's my method that I've checked again, right? So if I go back again and try this out, you can see that it comes back, right? It resets every time I do this. This works, right? No problem. It'll reset my size of my label dynamically, right? It does, it does, it does. But the problem is, and here's the problem, if I go back to my code, my little method that checks width and height, right? My boundary, it checks my boundary, right? It checks my boundary on my my game loop, my canvas height, as an example, and my canvas width. This gets handed in here, width and height, and my canvas width and height just changed because of my inner width and height of my window. To show you this, what I'm talking about, one more time, let's take a look of what happens when I make it so that it's slightly smaller, right? So if I go back to this, it's here. See how it's bounding? But once I change the size of my screen, for example, let's say if I inspect, I'm actually running way behind, guys. If I change the size of my screen as an example, and I do one of these, right, you can see that the inner width and height is up to here now. All right, let's break, and then when we come back next time, we'll do more special effects with this stuff, okay?